51-year-old author Helen Bailey was thriving, eagerly planning her wedding and sharing her life with her cherished dog Boris. But beneath this facade of happiness lay a sinister truth. Just as Helen began to embrace a new chapter filled with love, she would fall victim to betrayal. What seemed like a promising future would soon unravel into a tragic tale of greed and murder, forever changing the lives of those who loved her. On April 11, 2016, in the quiet town of Royston, Hertfordshire, a chilling mystery began to unfold. Helen Bailey, a 51-year-old successful author known for her Electra Brown series, seemed to have vanished without a trace. Her fiancé, Stewart, a 55-year-old widower with whom she shared a home, reported her missing 4 days later. Helen's beloved dachshund Boris had also disappeared. Stewart claimed he had found a note from Helen stating she needed some time alone and had gone to their holiday home in Broadstairs. This explanation initially seemed plausible, given Helen's history of coping with grief through writing and reflection. However, as days turned into weeks with no sign of Helen or Boris, those who knew her best began to suspect something far more sinister was at play. Little did they know this disappearance would unravel into a tale of betrayal, greed, and cold-blooded murder. Helen Bailey was born on August 22, 1964, in Northumberland, England. She grew up in a supportive family environment and developed an early interest in writing. Initially aspiring to become a forensic scientist, she pursued a degree in psychology at Thames Polytechnic. However, she transitioned into a career in media and marketing, working on projects for popular children's characters such as Rugrats and Garfield. In 1996, Helen married John Seinfeld, the head of a licensing rights company. The couple enjoyed a successful life together until tragedy struck in February 2011, when John drowned while swimming during their holiday in Barbados. Following his death, Helen began to process grief through writing and starting the blog Planet Grief, which resonated with many who were also experiencing loss. This blog not only served as an outlet for her emotions, but also helped her connect with others facing similar challenges. It was through this platform that she eventually met Stewart, leading to a new chapter in her life. Helen was financially secure, with assets exceeding £3 million and a life insurance policy valued at £1.8 million. This financial stability would later play a significant role in the investigation into her disappearance and subsequent murder. Helen's estate included substantial properties in Royston and Broadstairs, which she intended for Ian to inherit, reflecting her trust in him. Helen Bailey met Stewart in October 2011 through her blog Planet Grief, where both shared their experiences of loss after the deaths of their respective spouses. Their connection grew as they bonded over their shared grief, ultimately leading to a romantic relationship. As their relationship progressed, Helen and Ian moved in together, blending their families. Ian had 2 adult sons from his previous marriage, and Helen brought her beloved dog Boris into the new household. The couple appeared to be building a life together, making plans for marriage, and creating a family unit that included Ian's children. However, the dynamics of their relationship were complex. While they presented a united front to the outside world, underlying tensions and financial motives would later emerge as critical factors in the investigation surrounding Helen's disappearance. Additionally, Helen's trust in Ian was evident, as she had made him a beneficiary in her will and had granted him power of attorney over her financial affairs. These elements would play a significant role in the events that followed and the tragic outcome of their relationship. On April 15, 2016, Helen Bailey was last seen in Royston, Hertfordshire. Leading up to her disappearance, Helen was actively engaged in planning her upcoming wedding to Stewart. On that day, she visited various wedding venues, indicating her excitement for the future. Later that afternoon, Helen left a note for Ian, stating that she needed some time alone. This note suggested she intended to go to their holiday home in Broadstairs. However, it was later established that she had not traveled there, raising immediate concerns about her whereabouts. Helen's sudden absence was out of character for someone who had been looking to a new chapter in her life. The note and her activities on the day of her disappearance would come as crucial pieces of evidence as the investigation unfolded. Witnesses later confirmed seeing Helen walking Boris between 3:40 p.m. and 3:50 p.m. on April 11th, further establishing her last known movements. Authorities began to question Stewart as a person of interest when discrepancies in his account of events emerged. His claim that Helen had left voluntarily raised suspicions among family and friends, who described her as devoted to both her writing career and dog. The investigation into her vanishing would soon reveal a much darker reality behind Ian's actions and intentions. Following Helen Bailey's disappearance on April 11, 2016, the initial police response classified the case as low priority. This was largely due to the fact that Helen was an adult who had left a note indicating she needed time alone. The note suggested she might have gone to their holiday home in Broadstairs, which led authorities to believe she may return. However, as days passed without any contact from Helen, concerns grew among her family and friends. They described her disappearance as out of character, prompting police to escalate their investigation. On April 15th, Ian Stewart reported her missing to the police, which triggered her more thorough inquiry. The search efforts involved both police and volunteers. Officers conducted house-to-house inquiries in the local area, seeking information from neighbors and anyone who might have seen Helen or her dog, Boris. Search teams also scoured parks in nearby locations, where she was known to walk. Witnesses later confirmed seeing Helen walking Boris between 3:40 p.m. and 3:50 p.m. on April 11th, further establishing her last known movements. Despite these efforts, no leads emerged initially, leading investigators to consider the possibility that something more serious had occurred. The lack of evidence in Helen's sudden absence heightened the urgency of the investigation, setting the stage for deeper scrutiny of Ian Stewart's actions and statements regarding her disappearance. Notably, inconsistencies in Ian's accounts began to raise suspicions about his involvement in her vanishing. As the investigation into Helen Bailey's disappearance progressed, significant technological leads emerged that would prove critical in piecing together the timeline of events. On April 16, 2016, investigators discovered that Helen's mobile phone had connected to the Wi-Fi network at the couple's holiday cottage in Kent. This connection occurred just days after she was reported missing. The significance of this finding was twofold. It indicated that Helen may not have gone to the cottage voluntarily, as initially suggested by Ian Stewart, and it raised questions about his whereabouts during this time. The prosecution would later argue that this connection was a critical piece of evidence, suggesting that Ian had visited the cottage after reporting Helen missing, potentially to stage a cover-up. Further scrutiny of financial records revealed suspicious bank activity. On the day Helen disappeared, Ian Stewart increased a standing order from Helen's personal bank account to their joint account from £400 to £4,000 per month. This sudden increase raised immediate red flags for investigators. It suggested a premeditated plan to access Helen's funds without her consent, indicating potential financial motives behind her disappearance. Additionally, investigators noted that Ian attempted to use power of attorney over Helen's financial affairs shortly after she went missing, further implying his intent to control her assets while she was still classified as a missing person. Moreover, investigators found evidence of Ian's online searches related to how to dispose of a body and inquiries about life insurance policies shortly after Helen's disappearance. These searches added another layer of suspicion regarding Ian's intentions and actions following her vanishing. These technological leads not only provided critical evidence linking Ian Stewart to Helen's disappearance, but also highlighted his potential motives and actions following her vanishing. The combination of phone activities and suspicious financial transactions significantly shaped the direction of the investigation and ultimately contributed to the case against him. As the investigation into Helen Bailey's disappearance progressed, Ian Stewart's behavior began to raise suspicions among investigators. Shortly after reporting Helen missing, he took a holiday to Mallorca, which was viewed as an unusual response for someone whose partner had vanished. His absence from the search efforts and lack of engagement with the investigation prompted law enforcement to scrutinize his actions more closely. Upon his return from Spain, Ian was questioned by police regarding his movements and inconsistencies in his account of events. During these interviews, investigators noted several discrepancies in his statements about Helen's disappearance. For instance, he struggled to recall details about her, such as the color of her eyes and their holiday home's address. This further raised red flags, leading authorities to consider him a person of interest. On July 11, 2016, police arrested Ian Stewart on suspicion of murder. The arrest came after they had gathered enough evidence to question his involvement in Helen's disappearance. The combination of his suspicious behavior, the timing of his holiday, and inconsistencies in his story culminated in this significant development in the case. Notably, investigators had also uncovered evidence suggesting that Ian had attempted to use power of attorney over Helen's financial affairs shortly after she went missing, indicating potential motives tied to her wealth. The arrest marked a turning point in the investigation, shifting the focus toward Ian and setting the stage for subsequent legal proceedings. As authorities delved deeper into his actions and financial motives, it became increasingly clear that Ian Stewart was not just a grieving partner, but a prime suspect in a chilling crime. On July 15, 2016, a significant breakthrough occurred in the investigation into Helen Bailey's disappearance. Police, acting on intelligence and suspicion surrounding Ian Stewart, conducted a search of their home, Hartwell Lodge in Royston. During this search, officers discovered human remains hidden in a cesspit beneath the garage. Alongside Helen's body, the remains of her dachshund, Boris, were also found. This discovery was made after investigators had been alerted to the possibility that Helen's body could be concealed on the property. The cesspit was located under a concrete slab and was not accessible without excavation. The police had previously noted inconsistencies in Ian's statements and his behavior following Helen's disappearance, prompting them to focus their search efforts on the home. Upon uncovering the bodies, forensic teams immediately began their work. An autopsy was conducted to determine the cause of death. The findings revealed that Helen had been drugged with zopiclone, a sedative commonly used to treat insomnia. Traces of this medication were found in her system, indicating she had been incapacitated before her death. The condition of the body suggested foul play. Helen's remains showed signs consistent with suffocation. This evidence was critical in establishing a timeline and method of murder, linking Ian Stewart directly to her death. The discovery not only confirmed the worst fears of those searching for Helen, but also provided law enforcement with the necessary evidence to charge Ian Stewart with her murder shortly thereafter. This pivotal moment marked a turning point in the case, shifting the focus from a missing person investigation to a homicide investigation, with Ian as the primary suspect. On July 16, 2016, Ian Stewart was formally charged with multiple offenses, including murder, preventing the course of justice, and preventing a lawful burial. These charges were a direct result of the investigation into the disappearance of Helen Bailey, whose remains had been discovered just a day prior. Following the charges, Stewart was remanded in custody pending further legal action, reflecting the seriousness of the allegations against him. On July 19, 2016, Ian Stewart made his first court appearance at St. Albans Crown Court. During this initial hearing, the formal charges against him were presented to the court. The prosecution outlined the evidence that had been gathered thus far, which included critical findings from forensic investigations and witness testimonies that suggested a troubling narrative regarding Stewart's involvement in Helen's disappearance and death. The court proceedings marked the beginning of a complex legal process that would unfold over the coming months. The prosecution emphasized the gravity of the situation, indicating that they would be seeking a conviction based on substantial evidence linking Stewart to Helen's murder. In August 2016, the investigation into Ian Stewart's involvement in Helen Bailey's murder continued to intensify as authorities focused on gathering critical evidence. Investigators directed their efforts towards scrutinizing Ian Stewart's financial activities, which were pivotal in establishing a potential motive for the crime. Investigators analyzed communications between Ian and various financial institutions. They sought to understand the extent of his knowledge regarding Helen's financial affairs, particularly in relation to her assets, which exceeded £3 million, and a life insurance policy valued at £1.28 million. The findings indicated that Ian was not only aware of Helen's wealth, but may have had financial motives tied to her death. On October 12, 2016, Ian Stewart appeared in court for a plea hearing at St. Albans Crown Court. During this session, he formally pleaded not guilty to all charges brought against him, which included murder, preventing the course of justice, and preventing lawful burial. This plea set the stage for the upcoming trial, as the court scheduled the proceedings to commence in January 2017. The not guilty plea indicated that Stewart would contest the allegations made by the prosecution, and that the case would proceed to trial. His defense team began preparing their strategy, aiming to counter the evidence that had been gathered during the investigation. The trial of Ian Stewart commenced on January 9, 2017, at St. Albans Crown Court. This marked a pivotal moment in the legal proceedings surrounding the murder of Helen Bailey. During the opening day, both prosecution and defense presented their initial statements, outlining the key arguments that would shape the trial. Allegations against Ian Stewart were as follows. The prosecution laid out serious allegations against Ian Stewart, asserting that he had drugged Helen Bailey with zopiclone for several months prior to her murder. They contended that this drug was part of a calculated plan to incapacitate her, ultimately leading to her suffocation. The prosecution further claimed that after killing Helen, Stewart disposed of her body in a cesspit located beneath their home. The prosecution introduced several critical pieces of evidence to support their claims. Investigation revealed that Helen's mobile phone had connected to the Wi-Fi network at the couple's holiday cottage in Kent shortly after she was reported missing. This connection suggested that Stewart may have visited the cottage after her disappearance, raising suspicions about his involvement. Evidence was presented showing that on the day Helen disappeared, Stewart had significantly increased a standing order from Helen's personal bank account to their joint account, raising it from £400 to £4,000 per month. This action indicated potential financial motives behind his actions. The prosecution had also highlighted attempts by Stewart to use power of attorney over Helen's financial affairs shortly after she went missing. This raised further questions about his intentions regarding her assets. Helen's brother provided testimony regarding a previous conversation where Helen had jokingly remarked that the cesspit in their garage would be a great place to hide a body. This statement became significant given the location where her remains were ultimately found. Apart from the evidence, the prosecution also presented several witnesses that included family and friends, as well as forensic experts. Family and friends described Helen's state of mind leading up to her disappearance. They expressed concerns about her well-being and highlighted observations regarding her relationship with Ian Stewart, suggesting it may not have been as stable as portrayed. Forensic experts testified about the autopsy findings, confirming drugging and the cause of death. They indicated that traces of zopiclone were found in Helen's system, corroborating the prosecution's claims regarding her incapacitation prior to death. In contrast to the prosecution's assertions, Ian Stewart claimed during his defense that Helen had been kidnapped by two men on the day she disappeared. He alleged that he had not reported this to the police initially in an effort to protect her, and claimed that these kidnappers demanded a ransom of £500,000. The defense attempted to portray Ian Stewart as a caring partner who was deeply affected by Helen's disappearance. They called character witnesses who challenged the prosecution's evidence as circumstantial, and argued that there was no direct proof linking him to the crime. The trial proceeded with critical cross-examinations that revealed significant inconsistencies in Ian Stewart's statements regarding Helen Bailey and their relationship. The prosecution's questioning focused on discrepancies in Stewart's accounts of events leading up to Helen's disappearance. For instance, during police interviews, he had struggled to recall basic details about Helen, such as the color of her eyes and the address of their holiday home. These lapses raised doubts about his credibility and suggested a lack of genuine concern for her well-being. In contrast, the defense sought to discredit witness testimonies presented by the prosecution. They aimed to challenge the reliability of the evidence against Stewart, suggesting that the testimonies were based on speculation rather than concrete proof. The defense attempted to introduce alternative scenarios that could explain Helen's disappearance without implicating Stewart, emphasizing their narrative of a possible kidnapping. A pivotal moment in the trial occurred when the jury visited Hartwell Lodge, the site where Helen's body had been discovered. This visit allowed jurors to gain first-hand insight into the physical context of the crime, including the cesspit where both Helen and her dog Boris were found. Observing the location provided jurors with a tangible understanding of the evidence presented during the trial. In the closing statement, the prosecution summarized their case against Ian Stewart, emphasizing the financial motivations and premeditated actions that led to Helen Bailey's murder. They reiterated that Stewart had a clear financial incentive to kill Helen, as he stood to gain significantly from her death through her life insurance policy and her substantial assets. The prosecution argued that Stewart meticulously planned the murder, drugging Helen with zopiclone to incapacitate her before suffocating her. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who had deceived not only Helen, but also those around him, orchestrating a facade of concern while plotting her murder for financial gain. In response, the defense delivered their closing statement by reiterating their alternative theory regarding Helen's disappearance. They maintained that Ian Stewart was not responsible for her death, but rather she had been kidnapped by two unknown assailants. The defense argued that there was a lack of direct evidence linking Stewart to the crime, emphasizing that the prosecution's case relied heavily on speculation and circumstantial evidence. Ultimately, on February 22, 2017, the jury reached their verdict, finding Ian Stewart guilty of murder. This decision confirmed the suspicions surrounding his involvement in Helen Bailey's death and validated the prosecution's narrative regarding his financial motives and premeditated actions. On February 23, 2017, Ian Stewart faced the sentencing hearing at St. Albans Crown Court following his conviction for the murder of Helen Bailey. The courtroom was filled with those affected by the case, awaiting the judge's decision on the appropriate punishment for Stewart's actions. During the hearing, Judge Andrew Bright delivered a pointed and comprehensive address regarding Stewart's conduct and motivations. He described Ian as a manipulative individual who had planned Helen's murder with clear premeditation. The judge emphasized that financial gain was the primary motive behind Stewart's actions, noting that he had orchestrated a scheme to benefit from Helen's considerable wealth. Following Judge Bright's remarks, he announced the sentence for Ian Stewart: life imprisonment with a minimum term set at 34 years. This sentence reflected the serious nature of the crime and the premeditated manner in which it was carried out. The judge also took into account considerations for public safety regarding Stewart's future relationships, indicating that he posed a potential danger to women with whom he might form connections. The minimum term established would ensure that there would be significant time before any consideration for parole could be made. On August 21, 2018, following Ian Stewart's conviction of the murder of Helen Bailey, police initiated a re-examination of the circumstances surrounding the death of his first wife, Diane Stewart, who had died in 2010. The renewed investigation was prompted by concerns raised during the trial about the nature of Diane's death. Initially ruled as an accident, the circumstances surrounding her passing began to draw scrutiny in the light of Ian's subsequent actions and the revelations about his character. Authorities sought to determine whether there were any connections between Diane's death and Ian's behavior, particularly given the manipulative tendencies he exhibited in his relationship with Helen. Stewart appeared in St. Albans Crown Court on July 6, 2020, facing charges related to Diane's murder. His defense during this trial was similar to that in Helen's case, where he attempted to deflect blame and present alternative narratives regarding the circumstances of her death. Ultimately, the jury found Ian Stewart guilty of Diane Stewart's murder on February 9, 2022. Initially sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, which would have meant he would serve his sentences without the possibility of parole. This was later reduced to a minimum of 35 years by the Court of Appeal on July 29, 2022. The case of Helen Bailey is a harrowing example of betrayal, manipulation, and the tragic consequences of an abusive relationship. Ian Stewart's actions not only ended the life of a beloved author, but also revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior that ultimately led to his conviction of 2 murders. What do you think could have been done differently to prevent such a tragic outcome? Could earlier intervention have changed the course of events for both Helen and Diane Stewart? Regardless of the circumstances, Ian Stewart was found guilty and rightfully sentenced for his heinous crimes. He is charged and guilty for murder of Helen Bailey, convicted on February 22, 2017, and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 34 years. Murder of Diane Stewart, convicted on February 9, 2022, initially sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, later reduced to a minimum term of 35 years by the Court of Appeal.